They laughed when the widows started nailing boards around her Kansas farmhouse like a coffin, called her mad, called her broken. But when the ice storm turned every woodpile for miles into frozen stone and chimneys went dark across Ellis County, only one house kept burning, and they came crawling.
Hello, compliments of the season. If you love heartwarming stories about life in times past, then you'd enjoy these stories. Comment where you're watching from, like and share these videos with loved ones as you enjoy them. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel too. My team and I have something free and beautiful for you once we hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. It will be shared in the community. You know, we go to great lengths to make these videos, and your support means a lot to us. Therefore, we plan to give back to you once we are able to, so be a part of what we are building.
The first time they saw her doing it, Samuel Gallagher told his wife she'd finally cracked under the weight of being alone. "This is what grief does to a woman," he said, squinting across the prairie at the widow down by the Smoky Hill River bend, hammering rough pine planks straight onto the side of her house, covering the walls like she was building a second home around the first. "She's sealing herself in like a tomb." They watched from their fields that October afternoon in 1873, leaning on their plows, pretending not to stare too hard as Melissa Thornhill hauled another load of lumber from the trading post in Hayes. Her daughter Ada, just 8 years old and thin as a fence post, trailed behind, dragging a tin pail full of nails that clanged with every step. The girl's face was serious, dirt-smudged, silent. She didn't play like other children. She worked. Herman Stoltz, the German farmer whose land bordered Melissa's to the north, laughed the loudest. "Woman's building her own casket," he said in his thick accent, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "This is what happens when women try to think like men." Melissa was 29, face like prairie stone, smooth but weathered by a year of widow's work. Her husband, Frank, had died that past spring, kicked in the chest by a spooked horse while breaking ground near the river. He'd lived 2 hours, long enough to know he was dying, long enough for Melissa to watch him go cold despite everything she tried. She buried him under the cottonwood behind the house, then kept working like nothing had changed, which maybe, for a woman like her, nothing had. She had no family nearby, no man to help raise Ada, and no money to hire hands. By late October, what Melissa was building became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just boards nailed haphazardly to the walls, it was engineered. She built a complete corridor wrapping all 4 sides of her homestead, stopping only where the stone chimney rose from the back wall. A loose outer room, not quite a porch, not quite a barn, just a long narrow walkway of planks enclosing the original structure. But she didn't stop there. She layered it. Planks, then tar paper, then an air gap, then more planks. The roof extended outward at a careful pitch, creating an overhang that would shed snow and rain away from the walls. Inside this strange wooden sleeve, she began stacking firewood. Not just stacking it, organizing it. Cottonwood on the south side, oak along the north, cedar bundled and hung from hooks near the door. Every piece split clean, bark stripped, sorted by size and type. At Sunday gatherings outside the church in Hayes, the whispers grew louder. Martha Gallagher shook her head with practiced sympathy. "Poor thing doesn't know what she's doing. Grief's addled her mind." The Kowalski family, Polish immigrants who'd arrived 2 years before, watched from their soddy and muttered in their own language. Whatever they said, the tone was clear, pity mixed with judgment. Herman Stoltz made it his personal mission to announce the widow's foolishness to anyone who'd listen. "Waste of good lumber," he declared at the trading post, loud enough for Melissa to hear as she purchased more nails. "Could have built a proper shed like a sensible person, but no, she wraps her house like a Christmas package." Melissa never responded, never explained. She just paid for her supplies, loaded her cart, and drove back home, with Ada sitting silent beside her, small hands gripping the wagon rail.
December came to Ellis County cold but manageable. The kind of winter folks had survived for years with nothing more than good sense and a decent woodpile. Snow fell in measured amounts. Temperatures dropped, but not dangerously, and the neighbors' confidence grew with every ordinary day that passed. "See?" Herman Stoltz said to Samuel one morning, gesturing toward his own woodshed, a traditional open-sided structure built in the German style his father had taught him. "This is all you need. That widow wasted half a season's wages on foolishness." Samuel's woodpile stood massive and uncovered beside his barn, stacked the Kansas way, exposed to the elements but protected by nothing more than its own bulk. The Kowalski family had their wood lined against their soddy wall, tarps thrown over the top. Standard, sensible, the way it had always been done. Meanwhile, Melissa continued her preparations as if the ordinary winter around her didn't exist. She sorted kindling by size, storing the smallest pieces in sealed wooden crates inside her protected corridor. She taught Ada the hierarchy of fire. Cottonwood shavings first, then pine, then the oak when the flame is strong. Never rush it. Fire needs to breathe. Ada learned quickly, her small hands mimicking her mother's precise movements. On New Year's Day, the community gathered at the Gallagher homestead. Melissa attended, standing at the edge of conversations, holding Ada's hand. When Martha tried to make pleasant talk about the coming spring, Melissa only nodded. When Herman raised his glass and made a joke about fortress houses, she didn't flinch. That night, tucking Ada into bed, the girl asked, "Why did we build it different from everyone else?" Melissa pulled the quilt tight, her face unreadable in the lamplight. "Because I can't lose anyone else." If you want to see what happens when the storm hits, subscribe now, because what comes next changed Ellis County forever. January 12, 1874 began wrong. The temperature climbed to 45 degrees by morning, strange and unsettling for midwinter. Thick fog rolled across the prairie, turning the landscape into something ghostly and unfamiliar. Samuel Gallagher stood in his doorway and frowned at the sky. "Don't like this," he muttered. By noon, the rain started. Not snow, rain. Liquid drops that froze the instant they touched anything solid. Within 2 hours, Ellis County transformed into a glittering death trap. Fence posts became columns of ice, roofs wore sheets of frozen glass, and the woodpiles, every single exposed stack across the prairie, encased themselves in solid ice an inch thick. Samuel grabbed his axe and swung hard at a log. The blade bounced off, jarring his shoulders, barely chipping the surface. He swung again. The ice held firm. Herman Stoltz tried a hammer, desperately chipping away at his carefully stacked German woodpile. When he finally broke through, the wood underneath was soaked through, waterlogged and useless. It hissed and smoked in his stove, but wouldn't catch. The Kowalski family stared at their wood, now a single frozen mass against their soddy wall. No amount of chopping would separate the pieces. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. 15 degrees, then 10, then lower. Across the county, stoves sputtered and died. Chimneys clogged with creosote from desperate attempts to burn frozen, wet wood. Children began to shiver under every blanket their parents owned. The vicar's newborn cried with a sound that made his mother's hands shake. Mrs. Chen's arthritic fingers trembled too badly to strike a match. But from the valley near the Smoky Hill River, one chimney sent smoke rising steady and strong into the dark sky. Melissa Thornhill's protected corridor kept every piece of her firewood completely dry, untouched, ready. The first knock came at dawn. Samuel Gallagher stood at her door, pride shattered, his youngest son shaking in his arms.
Melissa opened the door without hesitation. Didn't ask questions, didn't gloat, just stepped aside and said, "Come in." Samuel stumbled through with his boy, and within an hour, Martha arrived with their other 3 children, wrapped in every quilt they owned, but still shaking from cold. By midday, the Kowalski family appeared, the father carrying one twin on his back, the mother pulling the other by the hand. Their lips were blue. On the third day, Herman Stoltz knocked. His hat was in his hands, fingers blackened with frostbite from his desperate attempts to split frozen wood. He couldn't meet Melissa's eyes. She pulled him inside anyway. By evening, 11 people crowded the small homestead. Melissa organized them like a general assembling troops. No chaos, no panic, just clear instructions and immediate work. "Herman," she said, handing him a pair of work gloves, "you stack the split wood in the corner. Keep it organized by size." The old German who'd mocked her loudest now moved in silence, doing exactly as told. "Kowalski boys, you sort kindling in the corridor. Small pieces in the left crate, medium in the right. Ada will show you." The 14-year-old twins followed the 8-year-old girl without question. "Martha, inventory the food, ration it by the day, not the meal." Martha nodded, already moving toward the pantry. Melissa worked between the protected corridor and the stove with mechanical precision. She selected each piece of wood deliberately, explaining as she went. Cottonwood for quick heat when someone comes in cold, oak for the long overnight burn, cedar for morning, it catches fast. Every log was accounted for, every flame purposeful. The space was tight, food was thin, but the fire never faltered. And for the first time since the storm began, the children stopped shivering. Herman finally spoke, voice rough. "I was wrong about you, Mrs. Thornhill." Melissa didn't look up, just handed him another log to stack. Day 4 brought more. Mrs. Chan arrived, barely conscious, half carried by the Vickers family. Their infant hung limp in his mother's arms, lips tinged blue, hypothermic but breathing. 19 people now filled a space meant for 2. Melissa moved through them like water, efficient and calm, but her eyes kept returning to her woodpile. It was shrinking. Fast. She calculated silently, lips moving with numbers no one else could hear. 4 more days if they were careful, maybe 5 if they burned less at night and let people sleep cold. That evening, Martha Gallagher asked the question everyone had been thinking. "How did you know? How did you know to build it this way?" The room went silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Melissa stood by the stove, poker in hand, staring into the flames. The pause stretched so long that Samuel started to speak, but then she cut him off. "I didn't know." Ada looked up at her mother from across the room. Melissa's voice stayed flat, factual, empty of emotion. "Frank died in spring, but he froze. The wind that night was so cold his breath turned to ice on his beard. I tried everything, blankets, fire, all of it, but the wood was damp from spring rain. By the time I got the stove hot enough, he was already cold. I watched him die because I couldn't keep him warm fast enough." She turned the log in the stove, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "I won't watch it again. Not Ada, not anyone I can help." No one spoke. Herman Stoltz, the old German farmer who'd called her foolish for months, began to weep quietly in the corner. Samuel Gallagher pulled his youngest son closer. The weight of what survival actually cost settled over them all, like snow.
Day 5 brought the killing cold. The ice storm had passed, but in its wake came something worse. Air so frozen it burned the lungs. Herman estimated 20 below, maybe colder, the kind of cold that stopped time, that made metals snap like kindling, that killed anything caught outside in minutes. Melissa stood in her protected corridor, staring at what remained of her wood. She recalculated. 3 days, maybe 4 if they let the fire burn lower at night and risked people freezing in their sleep. That evening, she made the decision. She walked to the corner of the room and picked up the spare chair, the one Frank had made their second winter in Kansas. Solid oak, hand-carved legs, hours of work in every joint. She carried it to the stove. Ada's eyes went wide. "Mama!" Melissa broke the chair against the floor. The crack echoed like a gunshot. She fed the pieces into the flames one by one, methodical, steady. Then she moved to the small table, the first piece of furniture Frank had ever built, back when they were newlyweds and still learning the prairie. She dismantled it with a hammer, removed each nail carefully so they could be reused, and fed it to the fire. Ada watched, silent tears streaming down her face as her mother burned away her father's memory piece by piece. Melissa's hands never shook. "Wood is wood," she said quietly, "and we're still breathing." Herman stood abruptly. "When we get back, take mine. I'll build you new furniture, better than before." Melissa nodded once, then fed another board into the flames. The Kowalski father moved toward the wall where a crucifix hung, hand-carved by his own father in Poland. "No," Melissa said firmly, "not that, not yet." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, they burned what they had to burn and survived another night. Morning of day 6 broke different. Herman felt it first, standing by the window before dawn. "The wind shifted," he said, voice hoarse from days of smoke and thin air. By mid-morning, the temperature had climbed to 10 degrees, then 15, then 20. The sound of dripping water began, hesitant at first, then steady. Ice melting from eaves, sliding off roofs in great sheets that crashed to the ground like breaking glass. Melissa added 2 extra logs to the fire. "We made it," she said simply. The room stirred with cautious relief. People began talking about going home, checking livestock, assessing damage. Herman volunteered to venture out first, pushing through the door into blinding sunlight, reflecting off a landscape transformed into glittering crystal. News came slowly as neighbors checked on neighbors across the scattered homesteads. 3 dead in Ellis County. Mrs. Chen's elderly neighbor, found frozen in her rocking chair. The vicar's infant cousin 2 homesteads over, who never woke from sleep. A drifter discovered in an abandoned soddy, curled around a pile of frozen wood he'd never managed to light. But the 19 people who'd sheltered in Melissa Thornhill's house, all alive, all intact. They emerged one family at a time, blinking in the sudden brightness, exhausted but breathing. Melissa's home stood stripped of excess furniture, her woodpile reduced to scattered pieces, but the walls held firm and the chimney still smoked. Herman gripped her hand at the door, couldn't find words, just squeezed once and nodded. Samuel Gallagher stopped, looked her in the eyes, and bowed his head deep. Martha embraced her, whispering thanks Melissa didn't acknowledge. Ada stood beside her mother, watching them trudge through melting ice toward whatever remained of their homes. When the last one disappeared over the ridge, Melissa closed the door, looked at her empty room, and began planning what furniture she'd build next.
By autumn of 1874, the Kansas prairie had learned its lesson. Homesteads across Ellis County sported wooden corridors wrapped around their walls like protective arms. Thornhill shells, people called them. Some said widow sheds, but everyone knew what they meant. Samuel Gallagher's was elaborate, a 2-layer system with ventilation shafts he'd designed himself, almost excessive in its engineering. Herman Stoltz built his with cathedral-height ceilings and German craftsmanship, elegant beams and dovetailed joints, like a church wrapped around a home. The Kowalski family constructed theirs with their twin sons, solid and functional, every nail driven with the memory of that week still fresh. But none matched Melissa's original. Hers remained unglamorous, purely practical, built not from cleverness, but from the certainty that winter would come again and mercy would not. A newspaper man from Hayes arrived in October with a notebook and ambitious questions. "Mrs. Thornhill, people say you saved 19 lives. They say you're a hero. Can you tell our readers your story?" Melissa stood in her doorway, saw in hand. Nothing to tell, just prepared for winter. But surely. Good day, sir. She closed the door. Inside, Ada helped her mother rebuild. A new table taking shape, new chairs, slowly replacing what had been sacrificed. The girl was 9 now, taller, stronger, and she knew how to split wood along the grain without being told, knew how to stack it loose for airflow, knew how to judge dry from damp by weight alone. Will it be bad again this year? Ada asked, setting down her tools. Melissa tested the edge of her saw, then looked at her daughter. Don't know, but we'll be ready either way. Outside, smoke began rising from chimneys across the valley as autumn turned toward winter. The prairie remembered, and this time, so did its people. If this story moved you, subscribe, because the women history forgot are the ones who saved us all.
If you enjoyed this latest story on life in the old Wild West, then I'm sure you will love the next one coming up. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on time. Did I tell you we post new, exciting, heartwarming stories daily? Subscribe now to join us so you won't miss any new stories.